All right, hello and welcome. If you're gearing up for the UGC NET exam, you know that Old English can feel, well, a little intimidating, right? So today, we're going to tackle it head-on, and we'll do it in a way that feels just like the real thing. A series of challenges, multiple choice style, all designed to get you exam ready. You ready? Let's dive in.
So, what's on the docket? Here's our game plan. First up, we're cracking the code of their poetry. Then, we'll try to find our way through the manuscript maze. It's trickier than it sounds. After that, it's all about heroes, monsters, and that big concept of fate, or Wyrd. Then, we'll shift gears to the beautiful, sad elegies. We'll wrap up the core content with the prose revolution and finish with one last challenge to lock it all in.
Okay, let's get started. Section 1, Cracking the Old English Code. Look, before we can even think about jumping into awesome stories like Beowulf, we've got to know the basic rules of the road. These technical bits, they're often the low-hanging fruit on the exam. You know, the easy points. So let's make sure we nail this.
First things first, let's get our bearings with a quick timeline. So, picture this. Around 450, Germanic tribes show up and they've got all these amazing heroic stories, but they're all oral. Then, bam! 597 is a huge turning point. The Gregorian mission arrives, bringing Christianity and, crucially, writing. Fast forward to the late 800s, and you've got the legend himself, Alfred the Great, who basically kicks off English prose. And then, it all comes to a sudden stop in 1066 with the Norman conquest. So see, it's not just a list of dates, it's the actual story of how this entire literary world was born and how it ended.
All right, time for our first practice question. This one's all about the nuts and bolts, the real mechanics of their poetry. So in Old English alliterative verse, how do the caesura and alliteration work together? What's their relationship? Take a second, read the options. What do you think?
Did you get it? The answer is B, and here's why. Think of every line of poetry as having a breath, a pause, right in the middle. That's your caesura. It splits the line into two halves. But how do you stitch those halves back together? Not with rhyme. You do it with alliteration, the repetition of sounds on the stressed syllables. It's like the sonic glue holding it all together, and it's what gives the poetry that punchy, driving rhythm. Super unique stuff.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Mapping the Manuscript Maze. And I got to tell you, this part is so important. Why? Because pretty much all the Old English poetry we have today survived in just 4 big books. 4. So you can bet the exam is going to ask you which poems are in which book. It's a classic.
And here it is, a perfect example, a matching question. On one side, you've got the poems. On the other, the manuscripts. Your job is to connect the dots. This is really just a memory game, but it's one you can totally win.
So how'd you do? Don't worry if it's tricky. Here's a little trick. Give each book a personality. The Exeter book, that's the moody, philosophical one with all the elegies. The Junius manuscript is the Bible stories collection. The Vercelli book is the deeply religious one. And the Noel Codex, well, that's the blockbuster, action movie manuscript, because it has Beowulf and Judith. Seriously, this table is your best friend for this section.
Okay, Section 3, Heroes, Monsters, and Wyrd. Now we're getting to the good stuff. This is the heart and soul of the Anglo-Saxon mindset. We're talking about the warrior code, that epic struggle against the forces of darkness, and this huge, ever-present idea of fate, which they called Wyrd.
Just listen to this line from Beowulf. Fate often saves an undoomed man when his courage is good. That says it all, doesn't it? You've got this pull between Wyrd, your unchangeable destiny, and your own personal courage. So the thinking is, you might not be able to change where you're going to end up, but you sure as heck can choose how you face it. That idea is everything in the heroic stories.
All right, let's test that idea with a question about a single word. But oh, what a word. It's ophir-mode, and it's probably one of the most debated terms in all of Old English studies. It's used to describe the leader Berthnoth in the Battle of Maldon, right before things go south. So, what does it mean?
The answer is C. And the reason this word is so fascinating is that it's super ambiguous. Does it mean greatness of soul, or does it mean reckless pride? In the poem, Brythnoth, filled with his ophir-mode, lets the Vikings march right into a better tactical position just so they can have a fair fight. It costs him his life. It's a perfect example of how the heroic code could be both incredibly noble and at the same time totally self-destructive. Okay, let's shift gears. We're moving away from the clang of swords and the shouts of battle and into something much more quiet and introspective. Section 4 is all about the elegies and divine visions. These poems they're just beautiful. They deal with these really deep personal feelings of loss, exile, and trying to find meaning when everything seems to be falling apart.
Now for a trickier question format you'll definitely see on the exam: assertion and reason. So, assertion A says that these elegies usually start with worldly sadness and end with Christian hope. Reason R says they do this because the poets were trying to prove the old heroic code was incompatible with being a Christian. So, you've got two jobs here. First, figure out if A and R are true or false on their own. Then, decide if R is the correct explanation for A.
The answer here is number 3. Let's break it down. Assertion A is absolutely true. That journey from sorrow to consolation is the signature move of poems like The Wanderer. But reason R is false, and this is a really key point. The poets weren't rejecting the heroic code. They were synthesizing it with Christian ideas. They took the old image of the lonely exiled warrior and transformed it into a metaphor for every soul's journey on earth. It's a blend of two worlds, not a cancellation of one.
So far, it's been all about poetry, poetry, poetry. But we can't ignore the other half of the story. Section 5, the Great Prose Revolution. This was a huge deal, and it was really led by one guy, King Alfred. His big idea was to educate his people using their own language, English, and in doing so, he basically invented English nonfiction writing.
Okay, another straightforward question for you, just to check our key figures. Who's the prose writer, famous for that alliterative prose style, making his prose sound a bit like poetry? And for writing the lives of the saints? Take a look at the options.
And the answer is B, Ælfric of Eynsham. This slide is perfect because it lets you see him side by side with the other major prose writer of the time, Wulfstan. The best way to remember them? Ælfric is the calm, clear teacher. His writing is musical and easy to follow. Wulfstan? He's the fiery preacher. His writing is urgent, passionate, almost angry, especially in his famous Sermon of the Wolf. Totally different vibes, both incredibly powerful.
We're in the home stretch now. This is our last section. It's time to pull everything together, connect all the dots we've been drawing, and think about the big picture. So here it is, your final challenge.
Let's circle all the way back to the man who really stands at the center of so much of this literature, King Alfred the Great. What was his biggest, most important contribution when it comes to the English language itself? This question gets to the very heart of why we even have these texts to study in the first place.
Of course, the answer is B. You really can't overstate this. Alfred's translation project was absolutely revolutionary. By taking all these important Latin books and translating them into his own dialect, West Saxon, he basically made it the official literary version of English. That one move helped create a sense of national identity, and more importantly for us, it's the reason these texts survived. Seriously, without Alfred, the whole field of Old English studies might just not exist.
So, there you have it. We've gone through the poetic code, the manuscript maze, the heroes, the elegies, the whole shebang. But I want to leave you with one last thing to chew on, a what if. This entire literary tradition, everything we've talked about, was basically brought to a screeching halt by one battle in 1066. So what if the Normans had lost at Hastings? What would English literature, what would the English language sound like today without that huge flood of French influence? It's kind of wild to think about, and it's a great reminder of just how much history and literature are tied together. Thanks so much for joining me today, and seriously, best of luck on the exam.